Well, all in listeners, we are back, and I am with someone you have come to know on this show. I'm with Melanie, Mel Morrow. How's it going, Mel?
Going great. It's actually Crane now. I got married since
the
last time I was on the show.
Yeah, I mean...
It's weird, I know.
Your email, though, you trick me because your email hasn't changed.
That's the last thing that needs to change. I am totally I am not being disciplined in changing my email.
Well, we're going to talk about that. Maybe we can identify which pillar you're not leaning into. What's been going on in your world this year?
Oh my goodness. Well, gosh, since the last time I was on the show with you guys, when I first came on, it was right after my first year in real estate. And then kind of going into my second year, my goal was to double my business. I got shy of that by a few units, but it was a successful, second year. And then awesome. Some amazing opportunities have started to come my way, which was kind of all in the trusting process of it all. And around Christmas time this year, I got some really clear direction in my mind and my heart and everything, and created a training and started on Knowles Development as a business coach and instructor. And I've been going and teaching to different market centers, which have been just such an incredible affirming experience for me. That's definitely kind of the direction I want to go into. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And you said I think you used these exact words, trusting the process. And, I think all of us need to be reminded of the fact that when we bloom where we're planted, new things show up and come our way. And when we're trusting the process, we're typically, at least I find myself, more ready to receive those opportunities that do come.
For sure.
Yeah. But sometimes I don't know about you. I mean, we're probably both wired as drivers. And so sometimes there's a little bit of impatience with that. I've got to imagine that sitting 2 years in with some great production, there's times where you're kind of oh man, when's this going to happen already?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It was such a blessing. And I had the awareness in that process to realize that the lesson that I was supposed to be learning in that moment was the fact that I wasn't supposed to know what my next step was. And so it forced me to stay planted and to stay present and to show up every single day as the best version of myself, doing at sales and whatever that was in front of me at the highest level, trusting that the opportunities and the timing was going to be exactly as it needed to be. And that clarity would come as well without forcing it. Yeah. And so, this whole year has been almost just that in a nutshell, this shifting of sorts and this clarifying trajectory, and it makes so much sense as to why I was kind of called into real estate in the first place. Now I get to combine my passion as a cognitive behavioral therapist, as an athlete, as a business person, and as a leader. And I'm living it now. And it's just such a cool place to be at this time of my, career. So
were you ever scared? I'll just leave it there. Were you ever scared?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And so that told me that I was on the right path. I most recently, when I created this training that we'll talk about in a little bit, it's called the 7 Pillars of Self-Discipline. And it was inspired by my experience as a Division I gymnast, my professional experience as a cognitive behavioral therapist, and working with athletes, elite performers. And then now tying it into real estate and the real estate business. I went out on a limb and presented for the first time out in California. And I was terrified. Yeah, and I knew that was the more scared I was, the more affirming it was that it was the right thing to do. And
were you in San Francisco? Is that where you presented? Is that why you have the Golden Gate Bridge behind you?
I have never been to the Golden Gate Bridge, so I'm
we got to change that. Yeah. Actually, I haven't either, so I don't know why I'm saying we have to change it.
I also like the sunset back there, so. But yeah, I mean, it was like the coolest experience and just so affirming the energy of the room and talking about what I'm really passionate about and people receiving the information well. And the feedback that it was valuable was just, it was so solidifying to the path that I'm kind of following and trusting. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I was
cool.
scared.
Well, a lot has happened then. I mean, name changes and all these other great things. And I mean, one of the reasons why, Joe and I love having you around and being friends is we like being around people who aren't afraid to go out and get it. And totally. That's why like it's so much fun to talk to you and stay connected. So today, yeah, I mean, discipline is something, I think sometimes it's I don't know what word I'm trying to search for, but sometimes it's just like this cliche word that we throw around when we are in an environment that is entrepreneurial. We say, well, you've got to be very self-disciplined. But I think a lot of times people don't even know what that means. Or we're coming at it from a different definition. Like as an athlete and as someone who studied this concept, like what does it mean to be disciplined to you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I could talk about this for hours, but really in a nutshell, self-discipline is, at the end of the day, it is the highest form of self-love because we are honoring our commitments to ourselves. And I wanted to challenge people's thoughts because I came from a place of extreme self-discipline, extreme regimen as a gymnast. Since I was 5 years old, all I knew was discipline. How I ate, how I slept, when I trained, when I went to school, everything was regimented and spelled out for me. And so coming out of that world, I had to almost relearn how to live in society. It was like re-entering, right? And so the thread that kind of came through my entire life was this of discipline. And what does that actually mean? It means that we lean into what we're supposed to do despite how we feel in the moment, right? It's discipline. It's different than motivation in the sense that motivation is our willingness to do something in the moment. Self-discipline is our ability to do it despite how we feel about it. There's a big difference there. And so the 7 pillars are not in any specific order, but it really encompasses the foundational pieces throughout all aspects of our life to live a disciplined life in every area, not just business, not just health, but holistically. So the first pillar is mental and emotional regulation skills. If we cannot control our mind and our emotions, nothing else matters. So it is truly the foundational blocks of the entire course. And it's in depth and it's dense and it's a little uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I preface
it's interesting. It's interesting that
please.
you are comparing this to gymnastics, and I don't. I'm probably going to offend you as a gymnast.
You're right.
My wife and I we're watching what's it called on Netflix? Cheer. She's all into this show, Cheer.
That's intense. They're hardcore.
It is hard. It's hardcore. And one of the girls. So I walked in last night at almost midnight after a softball game, and she has this playing because we're both coming down off the like energy high of a softball game. And one of the girls falls, and the coach actually said something to the effect of you're not regulating your mindset right now. And when you just said mental and emotional regulation, I just remembered that. And obviously they're in a very highly disciplined, hardcore sport. So that's very interesting. So, I mean, like you say that's the foundation. So even though your 7 pillars aren't in any particular order, you would say that like, what do you mean then by that? That's the foundation.
Because if we do not know how to control our mindset and our emotions, because our emotions are fleeting, our emotions are not real. They are situational feelings that we get, but often 99% of us react to them. So we're always in reactive mode. We're like corks bobbing through the ocean, all like reacting to life's distractions and demands and diversions. And that's the opposite of discipline, right? And imagine doing that for a month, 2 months, 2 years, like what does that look like for our life if we're constantly in reactive mode versus controlling our mind and our emotions in the moment, especially around things like what we don't want to do. Pillar 3 and 4 are all about procrastination management and prioritization and how to be disciplined around the things that we just don't want to do. I talk a lot about the neuroscience around our emotions, where our emotions come from, why do we have them at a very a biological level, so we can understand that it's not necessarily a character flaw. A lot of it is we have to just learn how to reprogram our mind, and we can. That's the beautiful aspect of our brains, is that we can actually reprogram our thought process and our thought patterns with intentionality around it. So we dive into that too. It's pretty interesting stuff. It's a lot of content.
What do you think? Of the pillars that you just mentioned, what do you think in real estate in particular is the thing that perhaps trips the most agents up? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do a lot, actually. So many things come to mind, but the first thing that pops into my head is, that concept of latent potential, where we give up before we break through. My last pillar is all about grit. Grit is the single most important attribute to breaking through latent potential. We have to push through to that 32 degree limit where we give up at 31. It's like when we think of nature, right? We think of the bamboo tree. We plant bamboo. It takes 5 years for that bamboo plant to actually surface through the soil. And then it takes 90 days for 5 years. Yes, 5 years. And then it just takes 90 days once it comes to the soil to reach 100 feet.
Wow.
So if we think of grit and perseverance and self-discipline as a bamboo tree, it puts it into perspective. So I think that in real estate, especially with new agents, we want instant gratification. We want to see things happen quickly. We are a society where we have things instant. It's such a disservice to the process of growth that we constantly have to be combating, even at a neurological level. Not to get too geeky about it, but our limbic system in our brain is wired for instant gratification. Our prefrontal cortex part of our brain is the motivational piece, the goal center. Our limbic system is instant gratification, impulse, reactivity. And so those two parts of our brain are constantly, fighting against one another. So we have to exactly. And that's where anxiety comes from. So we have to combat that. And there are ways to do that. So I think, just to answer your question, that grit piece, that latent potential of pushing through, continuing to persevere, fall down, 6 times, get back up 7. We give up too easily.
This is such a difficult question that I get all the time. And I just got it it was this past Friday, actually, again, from an agent who was we were talking about latent potential, and he didn't call it that, but it was really the question of, how do I know when I've pushed so far and I need to divert and go in a different direction? And that has been honestly one of the most complex questions to me. And I'm just curious, what's your perspective on that? Because yes, we want to push, because typically the diamond's just on the other side. That illustration from Think and Grow Rich, but how do we know?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, and I think it's hugely important that we take a holistic approach, which is the basis of my training specifically is let's look at your whole life. Let's look at the 8 dimensions of wellness. Are you feeding each bucket of your life? If you're only feeding 1 or 2, you're going to be burnt out. You're not going to be able to reach your full potential. If this specific person is feeling burnt out, okay, I've tried and tried and tried. When do I just give up? I would certainly say, okay, it's time to let's revisit the why. Let's revisit your values. Is your why strong enough to wake you up in the morning? If it's not, it needs to be bigger, or it needs to be more purposeful. In the 5th pillar of my training, it's all about identity-based goals. We call them heart goals instead of SMART goals, There is a time and a place for SMART goals. I love systems. I love numbers. I think it's very important. But if we don't create the foundation of our goals around our heart goals, the SMART goals aren't going to come to fruition anyway. So I think that's where I would start.
Yeah. I really like that, heart versus smart. So I bet that's probably just a whole section of gold there. Another thing I was thinking about when you were just sharing around the latent potential, you were kind of geeking out for a minute on the brain with the limbic system and just how we're wired for instant gratification. And on the flip side, how we struggle so much with something else in your training around procrastination.
Yes.
So it's like we have instant gratification around our goals, these things that we want, and yet we tend to procrastinate. And isn't that funny that war shows up there too?
Totally. So procrastination, again, is not something to be ashamed of or to be judgmental or feel guilty about. Procrastination is an emotional regulation problem. We avoid what's uncomfortable. At our innate nature, we push away and resist what feels uncomfortable to us. So for instance, lead generation. Okay. I had to, and I said this on our first podcast 2 years ago, I literally had to convince myself that I loved to lead generate. I wrote mantras, I wrote affirmations, I drew a vision board. Like I did that for the purpose of when I woke up, I actually felt excited about this task because the task was essential. Our job is to lead generate. We're lead generators. That's it. If we can't do that, we're not doing our job. And so I had to wrap my brain around, okay, how am I going to convince myself that this is the most exciting part of my job? Otherwise, it's going to be like white knuckling myself through the day, and that's not going to be good for anybody.
Wow. That's really powerful. So, all right. Have we touched on all the pillars? We're bouncing around from pillar to pillar, and I'm wondering, have we hit all 7?
We haven't yet. So
okay, all right. So which ones are we still missing?
Right. So we touched on pillar 1, which is the mental and emotional regulation skills. And again, this one, and I always preface these pillars like day 1 of the pillar training. I'll always say, this is going to be uncomfortable, and it's supposed to be. And if it's not, then we're not looking deep enough. Like this is like a raw, real material, like safe space, like let's get vulnerable, because we're looking at our cognitive distortions. We're looking at our self-limiting beliefs in a way that people can walk away and say, wow, I've never looked at it that way, or I've never thought of it that way. When we think of cognitive distortions, like essentially what those are beliefs that we pick up about ourselves before the age of 5. Based on our environment, right? And then we carry those with us for the rest of our lives. I share an example in my pillar 1 of, I struggled in school. I came from a school in Philadelphia that had like 50 kids in my first grade class. So I was not getting the attention and teaching that I needed. And I struggled and I struggled with reading. I got diagnosed with dyslexia. Like I really, really struggled. And so that core belief that I have carried and still have to kind of challenge myself around is I'm not smart enough, right? So we all have them and they're false and they're irrational, but they're a pattern. And it's the pattern we see the world through, right? So we talk about cognitive distortions. We talk about the neuroscience of emotions, how our brain evolved, the fight or flight mechanisms and all of how to combat some of those. And then we dive deep into some practical in the moment self-regulation tools that can be used before you pick up the phone to lead gen, before you go and knock on a door for, door knocking, those types of things. So that's a really dense pillar that could be like a 7-week course in and of itself. And then the second pillar is addressing ambivalence. And so this particular
pillar, what's ambivalence? What a word.
Yeah, right. Ambivalence is essentially when our thoughts and feelings collide. It's when we experience an internal resistance where part of us wants the change, part of us wants the self-discipline, part of us wants to do the things that we need to do to 10x our business. But then there's a slight voice inside of us that's resistant. whether we're afraid of failure, whether we're afraid of success, whether we're just afraid in general and we don't even know why, whether we don't want to put the work in, right? There's this internal conflict. We all have it. It requires some really, really deep, in-depth honesty and an honest look at ourselves and how we feel about certain things, right? Without shame or guilt. So we kind of peel back layers around our subconscious beliefs and the energy around what would it actually take to make this change in our life? And then what comes up right after that? What is that feeling? Is it fear? Is it excitement? Is it resistance? And then we do a lot of like motivational interviewing type stuff in this pillar. Particularly, we do a motivational chart where, we kind of paint out the picture of, what's it going to look like if you stay in this pattern for 5 years, 10 years, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? And is that scary for you? It's really about not being okay with the status quo anymore, but still being resistant to possibly changing and being all into that change. So that one's good. That one's one of my favorites. And it's a lot of it. I use a lot of my own experiences. I was going to say you've kind of you've shared kind of a story with almost everyone that you've shared so far. Like what? Yeah. So I mean, with ambivalence, truthfully, it was the ambivalence for me, I recognized really held me back. After I was done competing at a high level in gymnastics, I was like 23 and I was so burnt out of goal setting. It was like fatigue to the max. I got super out of shape. I got depressed. I wanted to drop out of school. Like my whole life felt like it flipped upside down because I was finished with my competition. My whole identity changed overnight. And I experienced that at a really high level. So, and then I recognized that there was a huge part of me that was so resistant to setting any kind of goal because I was afraid of the sacrifice that it was going to take because I was so used to the intense sacrifice I've always had. So even the smallest goals, I was like internally, I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I became complacent for like 4 or 5 years. And then through a lot of my own work, I recognized that it was this deep sense of ambivalence to becoming a person of self-discipline again, but not in the extreme like I had been living for the last 20 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's finding that balance a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. No, I see that show up in my life, and one of the patterns that I've had in general has been an ambivalence shows up if I'm not the best and I'm not winning immediately. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're similar that way, but like for whatever reason, I had these patterns through my competitive career early on where I was, not in an arrogant way, it just happened to be that I was the best and would win and win and win. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so then when I started to get up into upper echelons of competition, competing and not being first just automatically, ambivalence would show up because, I don't know, there was a fear for me, I guess, around just my identity being so wrapped up in David comes in first and having to deal with that and like walk that out and not run away. Because for me, I ran collegiate cross country, and as soon as I realized, I'm not going to win right away at this level, I almost searched for every excuse in the book to not compete. Totally. And I actually stepped away from competition, and similar to just like went into this period of just like, hey, I'm not going to compete at all. And having to try and do work around that. I've seen that show up in different areas of my life. Yeah. So you totally
understand. And honestly, this whole entire course has been so cathartic for me because it's forced me to get everything out of my brain and onto paper and put a story to it, because it was therapeutic for me because it's all crammed up here. And so to be able to put it on paper and then to teach it and back it with not only neuroscience, but my own personal experience at a high level with each of these things that has been, it's like the recipe of passion and being able to explain it and express it in a way that people can receive the information and relate to it.
I was just going to say that's where the passion comes from, is because it's true and it's experientially true as well for you, right?
Absolutely. You know, like when we think of success, like if success is fueled in fear, it's never going to happen. And so ambivalence is fear. It's fear-based. But it's not a negative thing. Ambivalence is actually a very positive thing in the stages of change. When we think of people with addiction, right? I used to work at a drug and alcohol rehab center. So I worked with a lot of people with addiction, and they were in this stage, whether it's pre-contemplative stage, where they don't even recognize that they have a problem. That's negative. That's dangerous. But then that contemplative stage is where ambivalence shows up, where they start feeling uncomfortable with the status quo. They want to make changes, but they're still afraid of what it's going to look like if they actually made that change. That's where that internal resistance starts coming up, because you're like, there's a push and pull, like a tug of war within yourself. It's actually a very positive place to be in the cycle of that behavior change. And typically people stay in this period of ambivalence for about 6 months. And then they move into contemplative and then preparation. So they're starting to prepare to make a change, right? So if we're talking about people in drug and substance abuse issues, right? If they're moving from ambivalence to preparation, they might be agreeing to go to rehab. They might be calling a coach. They might be talking to a therapist. They might start to read books, preparing to make that change. And then they go to action, where they're putting their intention into action. They're walking the steps, they're talking the talk, they're doing the things every single day. And then they move to maintenance. On average, though, people will relapse 6 to 7 times before they break that cycle, and that behavior becomes a habit. So we have to, I think at the end of the day, we need to be gentle with ourselves. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to continuously being in a growth mindset and being curious, and using each experience as data to teach us. So we're getting closer, Yeah.
Man, you're giving so much good stuff. And I can see why it's a 7-week course that you've put together. Because there's a lot packed into this thing.
That's only 2 pillars.
Holy smokes. All right. Let's keep going. Like what?
Keep on going. So the third pillar is procrastination management. So we talk all about procrastination. We talk about ways to overcome procrastination. And a lot of it's really logical stuff. But the takeaways that I really want to teach people in those moments is like, procrastination isn't a character flaw. It's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's the way that we're perceiving the activity that we're looking at. And because we know through neuroplasticity that we can actually change the way our brain is wired, we can change our outlook on those activities. Right? So giving people like the tools around how to do that. We talk about, the Eisenhower Matrix as well. What's urgent versus important. And oftentimes what's urgent is not the most important, and we need to be able to identify when we're bombarded with all the minutia of real estate. Okay, what do we have to do right now? What needs to go in the quadrant of planning ahead? What needs to go in the quadrant of delegating, and what needs to go in the quadrant of just completely deleting from our day? So we kind of go through an activity around that as well. So that's pretty cool. People really have seemed to like that procrastination pillar. And then, I think that
whole conversation around the Eisenhower Matrix is one of the least talked about, concepts that shows up most frequently in real estate. Right. Totally. Urgent versus important. And so I'm glad that you dive right into that.
I'm going to draw you a picture, David. Hold on.
Oh, draw me a picture.
I'm going to draw you a picture. Okay.
And then I'm going to try and use words to describe the picture to the audio audience.
Okay. See this? Oh gosh. You're not going to see it. Okay.
The virtual back. Oh, there. Back up. We're having Zoom virtual background issues.
I know. All right. I'll just explain it to you. So
All right.
in the top right quadrant, you know, if you look at a quadrant, all the boxes are the same size,
Yep.
right? In the top right quadrant, that box is actually 3 times bigger than all of the other boxes. And what goes in that box? That's the things that we don't see immediate results for, but they are the most important things in our business, which is lead generation. Right. So we're not going to see it's like weight management, right? You go to the gym today and tomorrow, you're not going to see any results. That's why we have to continue to diligently and be self-disciplined around the things in that quadrant, because they take time and attention, and they are the top 20% of the things we need to be doing. That's why it's 3/4 of the size of the rest of the quadrants.
Yep.
I don't know. Hard to explain.
It shut up a little bit. And I think you explained the concept very well. And that's just a good teaser, because now people just need to show up for the class.
Can't wait to do live classes. That's really where I love. There's just the energy, the conversation. It's just amazing. So my goal this year and moving forward is to bring value to as many, teams and market centers as possible with this stuff.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
What, so we're getting towards the end of our time and conversation here, but I mean, you've given so many great little nuggets, and I think, I mean, value that people can even just take away from this episode. But like, why do you feel like even in the last few years since since COVID and the world just accelerating faster and faster and faster, like, why do you think this topic is so important right now?
I think we, especially over the last few years, have gotten really comfortable, for no fault of anyone's. But when we fall out of routine, that momentum just subsides. And it's a whole lot harder to start something than to continue something. Right. So when COVID hit, it stopped all of us dead in our tracks. And for 99% of the population, that was enough to just completely derail people. But the idea of being disciplined in the areas that matter most, it's about becoming a person of self-discipline. It's not about acting self-disciplined, right? So it requires self-discipline in every single area of our life. And self-discipline in and of itself, there's so much research that correlates self-discipline to self-esteem, to self-confidence, to peace, to personal pride. We have to look at it that way. We have to look at it like we're giving ourselves a gift by honoring our personal commitments to ourselves. And if we're in a rut, or if we've become complacent, that's okay, because trajectory is so much more important than current reality. Right. So if whoever's listening today, if this is resonating with them, like, man, I've really fallen off the wagon with my health and fitness, or with my business, or with my relationships, or whatever, like, that's okay. Recognize that first and foremost. Figure out how you need to get some supports in place, whether it's a coach or a mentor, or call me. Love to have a conversation, whatever. But put those pieces in place. Set small, attainable goals that matter to you to get you back on track. And once you build that momentum, like, that's power in and of itself, and things start becoming effortless. Your life will start to become more in alignment. But I think right now we're all kind of healing from this whole derailing of our routine.
Well, and I think we're hit on all sides with kind of, I mean, you not just acting self-discipline, right? And I think in our society, we see a lot of people act self-discipline, because bring it full circle to the beginning of the conversation, like, discipline is kind of a catchy word in the entrepreneurial space. And a lot of people show up and show out as discipline. But what's interesting is that when you actually dig under the surface, they're typically a lot of times burnt out people. And you brought up the point, like, discipline actually prevents burnout. honestly, because there is an alignment.
It gives you freedom. It gets
Right.
not only time back, because we learned how to, there's no such thing as time management. It's all about self-management. And when we're disciplined, when we honor the things that we know we need to do for ourselves, not only are we giving ourselves time back, but we're giving ourselves peace of mind back. And I'm sure, David, you can relate to this, like the days that you lay your head on your pillow at night, knowing that you have successfully done everything that you're supposed to do. You got up, you got a good workout in, you made your calls, you did this, you had all the meetings, like everything in your day was a 10 out of 10. You feel amazing, right? Versus the times where, and I totally am guilty of this and can relate, like where we kind of just breeze by the day. We kind of half-ass some things. We're not fully committed. We just get through the day. And that feeling at night where on the surface it looked all right, we were able to get through, but we know we weren't doing it at our fullest capacity, or we know that we had things that we were left undone. Like it's a very different feeling. And your mind isn't able to actually unplug because you're just worrying about the things that you didn't do that day. So being disciplined is about doing the stuff that no one sees you doing, right? It's like integrity. It's like, what do you do when no one's watching? Like integrity, self-discipline is a form of integrity. It's a form of, again, like honoring ourselves. And it's a very different, it's a feeling too. In pillar one, I ask them, I have everyone close their eyes and I, run them through the miracle question. Like you go to bed at night and a miracle happens and you wake up the next day and you're a person of extreme self-discipline. Everything in your life, you're thriving, you're excelling, you're reaching your fullest potential. Like, how do you know that miracle happened? And we spend some time on that. And it's really fascinating to see people's reactions and responses, to give it and tapping into the feeling, not just the vision, because the feeling is what creates the energy. So.
Well, I'm so glad that we could introduce the All-In audience and community to, so many of these concepts. But we're only scratching the surface. And so I want you to tell everyone about your upcoming class and how they can plug into it. Because I think more than ever, this is needed training. And so I want to give that gift from you to our audience, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I would love it. And I'm always, as I said, I love to travel. So if anyone wants a little live, workshop day, give me a call. But for now,
who wants to come to Portland, Maine or Scottsdale, Arizona? I guess we got to get it on the calendar, huh?
Absolutely. But people can go to knowlesdevelopment.com. They can also email training at Knowles Development to Daniel. And I'm doing a condensed version, a one-day condensed version of all of the trainings on June 14th. So it'll be 10 a.m. Eastern time to 4:30. And for anyone listening today, there's a 20% off discount code for you guys, for the listeners of the All-In podcast. And the code is just All-In Podcast.
Perfect. So All-In Podcast, we will link up the promo code as well as the training in the show notes. So dive all into that opportunity. And Melanie, it was so good to catch up with you. I so appreciate, the way that you approach your business, your life, and just raw transparency. It's always fun to have you on the podcast.
Always. Can't wait to come back.
Awesome. Well, guys, that's another episode of the All-In Podcast. Dive all into this opportunity with Melanie and the 7 pillars of self-discipline. You will leave even the one-day intensive a better, more aligned person. And like I have said before, we are human becomings, not human beings. So let this be just another part of your journey, brought to you by Melanie and the All-In Podcast. Until next time, go play All-In.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the All-In Podcast. We want to invite you to find all of today's resources from our show page at aipodcast.co. We also ask that you take just 1 minute to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. This is how we grow and how we're able to bring you the best content each and every week. Now go play all in.